that you're seeing things you didn't see before. You're aware of thinking in a way that you weren't aware of thinking before because you were identified with it. You didn't know this is an interesting thing if you really consider it, right? Before you hear about awareness as the truth about who you are, therefore there's no possibility. Before you hear about awareness as the truth about who you are, you don't notice awareness. It's there, it's always been there, but you didn't notice awareness. Most people walking around, they're not aware that they're aware. That's a very interesting phenomenon when you consider it. They're not aware that they're aware. Prior to learning about awareness and prior to looking to see that awareness is present, always present, never not here, right? Prior to that, thinking was something that you were identified with. This is important, especially if you've been practicing for a while, that you see there's a difference, that thinking was something you were identified with. In other words, you were just being the voice in your head. You were just going through life, being the voice in your head, never questioning it, never questioning whether the voice is telling you the truth or not. It was because that's you. That's you. You don't, that's what you think. So therefore, there's nothing to question. That's what you're thinking, right? That's what you're feeling. And it's in that condition that the mental illnesses occur because you're identified with thinking, because you're identified with emotions, right? It's I am thinking, I am feeling, right? Therefore, when I am anxious and when I am thinking, racing thoughts, or when I am thinking confusing things or upsetting things, there's no way out. There's no place to go because that's all there is. That's the way it is for most people. And it's important when you begin to practice meditation to check in and see that now there's an awareness of being aware. Most human beings don't know they're aware. I mean, that almost sounds ridiculous, but it's true, right? Because when you practice meditation, when you move attention from the thought process to being aware of the body breathing, right? You're aware of being aware. When you're thinking that you're a person. You're thinking that you're the thinker of the thoughts, right? There's nothing about that there's awareness. Because all of the attention is on the mental state. All the attention is on the thought process. There is no attention on awareness. Not only is there no attention on awareness, but for the regular, ordinary person, there's nothing to be aware. They wouldn't know what you were talking about, because it's not something that the attention has been pointed to, right? The attention for most people has been outward all the time, outward all the time. A lot of people don't even know what's going on inside. They're identified with it. See, when I say they don't know what's going on inside, people think they're thinking, but that's not knowing what's going on inside. Because what's going on inside is thoughts are happening. You're not thinking. That's what's going on, right? But if you think you're thinking, then you don't know what's going on. Because the way you have it figured out is not the way it actually is. So you're not living in reality. You're not living the truth. You don't know who you are. You're not aware of awareness. And by practicing meditation, awareness starts to show up. Awareness starts to show up. So now because you practice meditation, now you have an interaction with somebody, and they say something, and you see your reaction. You didn't see it before. You see the emotion arise, and you see it from awareness, because now there's awareness. Not just the emotion, not just having the emotion, or being the emotion, or having the thought or being the thought. No, but now there's an awareness of that. So when we practice the formal practice and you're practicing being aware of the body breathing, that's a beginning. In these teachings, especially in the Zen method, the idea of being enlightened is a beginning. It's not the end goal. A lot of people have the misunderstanding that it's the end goal, and a lot of people have the misunderstanding that when it happens that you've arrived, and when it happens That's it. There's nothing to do. You are now God living in a human life. You see everything clearly. Nothing can trick you anymore. You're just blissful, just hanging out with flowers, right? That's a misunderstanding that a lot of people have. And it gets perpetuated, unfortunately, Back in the 60s, when the TM movement was around and when the Beatles discovered meditation and everything, there was a lot of magic. There was a lot of mysticism and magic about it all, right? And part of the reason for that is because it was mixed with psychedelic drugs, right? People were doing LSD and psilocybin and mushrooms and this, that, and the other thing, and practicing meditation. It was all part of the same magical mystery tour, as the Beatles said, right? So there's still a lot, that's still out there. There are still people believing that somehow, somewhere, someday, if they meet the right guru, if the right guru gives them a transmission, if they get touched by the golden hand, whatever it is, and they're waiting to go into retreats, reading, practicing meditation. But all of those activities, right, are about the idea that if I do all these things, I'm increasing the probability that the lightning will strike me. And when it strikes me, I will have this awakening, And you listen to so many of these teachers, it's still out there on the circuit, and a lot of these teachers that are out there being interviewed, the interviewers ask them to tell their story about enlightenment. Tell us when you got enlightened, right? Because that sells soap. That's what people want to hear, and so the people that are doing the interviews, they want to get the clicks. They want people to watch the videos, and so they figure out, well, what do people want to hear, and we'll tell them that. And so they interview the people who are supposed to be enlightened or spiritually awake, and they say, tell us your story, your enlightenment story. And so the person, tells a story, and it's always similar in terms of all of a sudden out of nowhere, everything just was perfect, and there was bliss, and it was beautiful, and on and on and on. But the thing that's very important to notice is that those people who tell those stories, right, when they're being interviewed, that wasn't the end of it all. There's a lot more that, they're still in a human life, living a human life, right? And so that didn't produce a final conclusion about their existence as a human being. But everybody wants magic, what I mean? Everybody's clinging to magic, whether it's the magic of being rich and thinking that's the answer, right? Or the magic of having the right guru, or the magic of taking the right psychedelic drug, right? Everybody wants magic. And we live in a culture that's a shortcut culture, right? Yeah, when you look at advertising, what's the thing they're selling right now, especially Amazon? We'll get it to you today. You don't even have to wait till tomorrow. You order it today, by tonight it'll be at your house, right? That's very strong appeal. That's why Amazon's worth $200 billion now, right? Especially during the COVID, right, when nobody wanted to go out. Amazon was like, wow, we got this now, right? Yeah, and then people get into the habit of using it, and you can't escape the lure of it, right? Because you start to think about, well, I want to buy a certain thing. And one of the things that you come to discover is almost everything is on Amazon. So you don't have to worry about going to a store and it not being there. You just turn on the computer and it's almost always there, right? And they will sell it to you for the cheapest price. If you tell them you found the cheaper place, they'll say, okay, well, we'll sell it to you for that. So that's the culture we're living in, and it's more that way than it ever was, right? Nobody wants to, that's why people have come to this class in the past. I'll never forget, there was a guy that came to this class who was a Vietnam veteran who was suffering from PTSD. You remember that? Yeah. And he was impressed with the class, and he practiced, and his only question was, how long is this going to take? Yeah. How long do I have to wait before I'm free of my symptoms and I can go on and, and live a life? And my answer to him was, well, the answer to your question is the same answer to the question, how long does it take to get a black belt in karate? It's the same question. Right? He didn't like that answer. Never came back, right? And not only did he not come back and he didn't like that answer, but he's on medication. And the medication's controlling his symptoms, right? And he's on disability, so he's getting paid, right? So one of the things that we came across in treating PTSD with veterans, right, is they will actively resist the process if it looks like it's going to work, because I'll lose my benefits. I'm not going to lose my benefits, right? So it's a very complicated reality we're all dealing with here, right? And the same thing is true for you and I, right? That there is a point in this process, and I'm interested to hear from you whether you've arrived at this point yet. There's a point in this process where the ego starts to say, oh, I don't want to give all this up. I don't want to give up, the things that I do that are not consistent with being enlightened. I don't know if I want to be that pure. I don't know if I want to become saintly. I like a lot of the stuff that I do that's wrong, right? There is a time when you actually, I remember going through that process, right? Where my ego was saying, oh, no, I don't want to go all the way. Yeah, I don't want to go all the way because I'll lose all these things that I like, that I enjoy. I'll lose all these things, these toys, these things that I get to play with and these ways that I get to be. I don't want to give that stuff up. And if that comes up for you, that's a good sign. It's a good sign. It means that you're engaged enough in the process that the ego is trying to stop this thing from going any further, right? But the thing that can happen as a realization, if you face that instead of identify with it, see, if you identify with it, then you're just gonna start, becoming sluggish. If you identify with it, you're gonna start missing meditation sessions and just say, yeah, that's not really that important. Because now the ego has got its foot in the door, right? And it's gonna try and get you off track, right? To take you off the path, right? But if you don't do that and you see it for what it is and you look at it and you ask yourself, well, what's the truth? Is it really true that you have to sacrifice in order to be enlightened? Is it really true that I have to give things up in order to be enlightened, right? And if you really pursue it and you really look, what you'll discover is that's not true. The ego and the mind get a bad rap in spiritual teaching. They get a bad rap, right? But if you buy into that bad rap, you're putting yourself in conflict with your own internal energy. You're putting yourself in conflict with your conditioning, right? Anything you resist persists. You start resisting the ego, you're going to get more ego, right? If you start resisting your emotions, you're going to get more emotions, right? So, yeah, it's very important. One of the aspects of this teaching is that if you understand who you really are, and you understand the nature of the awareness that you are, the nature of the awareness that you are doesn't resist anything ever. Never resists anything. It makes contact with everything that's occurring without resisting or rejecting anything. This is an important thing to understand. And so if you got it figured out, or if you think, oh no, and I'm guilty of this too, because I talk about the mind, the mind's going to try and stop you or control you and so forth. But when I'm saying that, I'm not saying like the mind has a mind of its own. Right? I don't mean the mind has a mind of its own. No, the mind's just a conditioned program. And it's conditioned to help who the program has it that you are survive. So it's innocent. It's not intentionally doing anything to hurt you. It's following its instructions. It's as simple as that. Now, those instructions happen to put it at odds with you when you meditate, because the instruction that the mind has is to maintain control. So you start to practice letting go, the mind's going to come in and try and stop that process, because the way the program has it figured out, unless it stops that process, you'll die, according to the program. Of course, the program's not accurate. You won't die, That's why I said in my book that, dying is the easiest possible experience you can have. That's why I encourage you to do it. Not to wait. It's the easiest possible experience you can have. And if you really get what it is that dies, and you really do allow that to happen, nothing happens. That's the discovery. Nothing happens. Now, when I say that, what I mean is if you really allow the personality, the self-concept, the self-image, who you are in the world, right? That's your ego, who you are in the world, who's on your driver's license, right? If you really let that go because you see the truth that doesn't actually exist, if you really let that go, really let that go, nothing happens. How could anything happen when it's nothing turning into nothing? Nothing becomes nothing. Nothing happened. And you just, now you may have the experience of feeling fearful, that you're going to disappear, right? You may have the experience of feeling fearful that you're going to disappear. But if you let go into that, if you just go with it and you go toward the fear and you face it and you feel it in your body and you let all the thoughts come up. This is what happened with Ramana Maharshi. He was terrified of death. So he laid down on the floor and he wanted to know. He wanted to know what happens when the body dies. Do I die when the body dies? So he laid down on the floor and he made his body stiff like rigor mortis. And then he imagined his breathing stop. And he was really presencing himself to death, right? And what happened was his ego, his personality just disappeared. It disappeared, right? And of course, this is a very unusual thing to happen the way it happened, right? But once it disappeared, there was no more fear. He wasn't living that life anymore. His life became a spiritual life from that point on. Now, that's not something that you and I have to deal with or do. In the world we live in, the highest likelihood, if you practice meditation consistently and you understand what it is and you keep developing deeper understandings of the teachings and so forth, right? And you keep applying it, you keep looking how this works as you move through your life, right? What will happen is the ego will gradually, it will gradually disappear. It won't happen all at once like it did for Ramana Maharshi, but it'll be less and less a factor. One of the ways you'll know that is in your relationship to other people, you'll experience having nothing to prove. Nobody can pick a fight with you anymore because you have nothing to prove. There's nothing to argue about. You accept the fact that other people are different. And that doesn't mean that they're a threat because they're different, right? That's because you're seeing things as they really are. You realize that who you are and who they are is the same, right? And the differences are not something that we have to fight about. So yeah, it is a matter of befriending the ego. It's a matter of loving the ego. It's a matter of befriending the mind and loving the mind. So when the mind presents you with scars, or the mind presents you with being hurt, when the mind is hurt, right, that you don't reject it. I don't want to feel, so somebody feels depression or anxiety, for example, right? And the way they react to that and relate to that is, no, I don't like this. I don't want to feel this way. I need medication. Something's wrong. I don't like this. This is bad. This is not good. Something's wrong. So you're rejecting. That's the mind. You're rejecting it. You're saying, no, I'm not going to feel that, right? The mind's asking for your attention. That's what's happening. When you have strong emotions, or when you have PTSD, or when you have depression, the mind is asking for your attention. Just like the body's asking for your attention when you feel physical pain, right? The body's saying something's wrong here, give it your attention, right? And if you had a cut on your arm and you were experiencing pain and you were seeing blood, you would give it attention, right? You would put something on it. You would assist it in its healing process, right? But the same thing is true with the mind if you understand the truth. When the mind's hurting, you don't reject it, right? You give it your attention. It needs to experience some emotions that it's stuck with, right? So it's hurting. And so you give it your attention, and when you give it your attention with love, when you give it your attention without rejecting it, being willing to give it time and allow yourself to be aware of how it's manifesting in the body and in the mind and in the emotions and in the thoughts, it will unravel its contraction. It'll play out whatever it is that needs to play out, right? And then it'll heal. It's trying to heal, right? And so the more awake you are, the more aware you are of the mind and of the ego, but not in a way where you're trying to get rid of it or control it. No, just aware of it so you can see what's happening with it. And when it needs something, when it needs your attention, you give it the attention. You help it to heal. So this brings up the subject of trauma, right? Because as a psychologist, when I work with people, part of the work, psychotherapeutic work, deals with trauma, right? People who've been molested when they were kids, people who were abused when they were kids, meaning just about everybody, right? Because really everybody's been traumatized. Everybody's been traumatized, right? You know what the biggest trauma is in all human beings' lives? Birth. Yeah. What is it? Birth. Yeah, birth is traumatic. Birth is traumatic. When the baby's being born, it's experiencing dying, right? It's experiencing dying, you know? It can't breathe, right? And then it comes into the world and it's cold and all of a sudden it's your first breath is like that. It's not a calm breath. It's fear. That's the first trauma, is birth, right? So there's a lot of things that have been developed in order to work with trauma with people, to try and release trauma from people because of the negative effect that it has on their functioning and the negative effect it has on their body and the whole 9 yards, right? One of the things about it that's problematic is that if the way you look at trauma is, and I think in a lot of psychological circles this is the way it has been looked at, that we have to get to the trauma, we have to dig it out, we have to stimulate it, we have to find it, we have to have a catharsis, we have to bring you back and have you have that experience that you repressed so you can be finished with it, right? The only problem with that is that if you push that and you get somebody to go back and start to experience the trauma that they had at some earlier time in their life, you could be re-traumatizing them. Because that doesn't necessarily, because you have to understand something. This is very important, and I talk about this in terms of meditation, but it's also true about psychotherapy. If you bring the person, the ego, back to an earlier event in their life where they were traumatized, if you bring the person back to an earlier event in their life where they were traumatized, and it's the person experiencing the trauma, they're being re-traumatized. Because it's the person re-experiencing the trauma. Before the trauma can be released, the person has to have a position outside of the idea of being a person. If you're the awareness and you know as the awareness, now you're the authentic self, not the person. Now, if you bring the person back, if you go back and bring them back to an earlier event that was traumatic, they have a place to see it from, they have a place to experience it from that's safe. They're not going to be re-traumatized. In fact, the way I see this is that if a person does the work and does the studying and does the practicing and really gets released from the identification with the body and with the personality, right? Whatever trauma's there will begin to naturally come up and get released. It will naturally come up and get released because you're relaxing the system, right? You're especially if you understand what I said earlier about you have a kind, loving attitude about your mind and about the person, the ego, right? And so you're creating a friendly, safe environment, and by creating that friendly, safe environment, that energy and that trauma that's been stuffed in the body and the system will come up naturally at the rate that's safe. It'll come up naturally at the rate that's safe. And you can be present to it. You can be present to it from an awareness perspective. So you can be present to the emotions, you can be present to the thoughts when they come up without identifying with them, without freaking out, you can just watch it. You can be there, you can breathe with it, right? And it'll come up and it'll release at its own pace, right? So you don't really even have to dig for trauma anymore. And to the extent that you know who you are, you're living a different life than the person anyway. So the trauma is no longer going to be having the effect on you that it was having when you thought you were the person that was traumatized. Well, if you're listening to what I'm talking about, one doesn't get out of that. One realizes that they're not the person that got traumatized. That's the personality. That's the person. The awareness never got traumatized. You can't traumatize awareness because awareness doesn't resist anything. It allows everything to. You can't traumatize the space in this room. Humanity as a civilization is living in a conceptualized, scientifically based reality that's not consistent with the truth. But even if you hear it, right? That's why in this class, it's often the case when somebody asks a question, I don't answer the question, I point to who they think they are asking that question. That's the goal, that's what this is about, you see? So you can even hear it, but that you're hearing it as a concept, you know, but you're really not getting it. You're really not getting what this implies. It implies that all the time you spend busy thinking, right, keeps you in a world of suffering. And that includes trauma. That includes your conditioning. It includes whatever happened to this body and this person from the day I was born until now. That's how your personality developed, right? Your personality developed by compensating for what you thought was wrong with you, right? That's how your personality develops. Compensating for what you thought was wrong with you, trying to create an image of yourself that is the best job you can so people will buy it, right? That's what the whole thing is about, you know, when you're a teenager, right? If you remember, we're all old enough here to remember some ancient history for a minute, but if you remember when you were a teenager, your whole life was about how you looked. Yeah. Your whole life was about how you looked, right? Because now you're in a place where you come out of being in the position of a child, you're preparing to go into adulthood, right? So you got to get your shit together. When you become a teenager, you're practicing having your shit together so that you can take the next step, you know, to get the right woman to fall in love with you so you can get married and have ugly kids. So, but when you're in your teenage years, that's your whole life. That's what everything's about, right? It continues to be that way, but, you know, there are different things that come and go, you know, and no matter what comes, that's never it, right? Remember what I said before, the program of the mind that's playing all the time is this isn't it. If you watch, you'll see it play. This isn't it, you know? What do I mean by that? Well, if you listen to the voice in your head, listen to it complain. That's what the this isn't it is, you know? If it's too hot, too cold, too loud, you know, too quiet, you know, too anything, you know, it's like nothing is ever, and when something is okay, it doesn't last. When something does hit the mark, then it's like, oh, if I can keep this going, you know, but you can't. So you suffer from dissatisfaction. That's what the word dukkha means in Buddhism, right? Dukkha. Dukkha is the Pali word in Buddhism that means suffering, but the actual definition of the word is dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction. You know, you spend a lot of your time being dissatisfied with yourself, with life, with politics, with money, with sex, you name it, right? Dissatisfaction. I'm trying to get more of what I want. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be smarter. I'm trying to look better. I'm trying to, you know, live longer. You know, everybody's like pushing. That's why people are always looking forward to the future, right? Because if you're living in a state of dissatisfaction, what are you going to pay attention to? Future. Yeah, because in the future, maybe it'll change. If I play my hand right, if I buy the right car, right? Maybe it'll change, right? There is no evil. It's the condition. You know, once you think that you're separate from the rest of humanity and the rest of the world, the condition kicks in. If that's true, then you should be scared. If that's true, you are threatened, right? So it's the condition, and then it will manifest in all kinds of convoluted ways. You know, people will get greedy, people will try and manipulate, you know, and then people will say, oh, there's evil people. There's no evil people, it's the condition manifesting itself. But I think it's part of the experience that you have when you wake up, is that you're satisfied. Because the satisfaction that you experience when you wake up is the satisfaction of being who you are. It's the satisfaction of experiencing who you are. It's the satisfaction of having gratitude and being satisfied with the fact that you exist. You can't ask for more than that. But that's not appreciated. That's not considered to have any value at all, the fact that you exist. That's the most amazing thing when you consider it, you know. Almost all of humanity doesn't consider the fact that they exist to have any value at all. When you see the truth and when you give yourself the opportunity to pay attention to it consistently, the thing that will gradually come into play that will take the place of the ignorance is that your existence is something that didn't start and it's not going to end. That's right. You have to have compassion because nobody's doing this on purpose. Nobody's being ignorant on purpose, right? So you offer the best you can to people. Sometimes when people are dying, you know, a guy came to me when I was working in the prison. He was an older guy and he was in the prison for a sex offense, right? I think it was molesting a child, right? And he came to me and he said, I'm old and I'm not going to live much longer and I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen to me, you know? And what I said to him, I said, well, look at it this way. Look at it like, like a waterfall, and the water's traveling, and the water comes to the edge of the waterfall. Let's call that birth, right? And then when the water falls, it splits up into droplets while it's falling, right? Like separate people, right? And then at the bottom, when it gets to the water again, it all comes back to one thing again, right? And so there's nothing to be afraid of. You know, what's happening is natural, and you won't be judged. You won't be judged. That's another thing that people don't understand, especially with a lot of organized religions. People are terrified of being sinners. Yeah. But that's not true. There's no hell, and you won't be judged. So, you know, that's part of the package. What? It's good to know. So now you're going to do some dirty stuff, right? I think everybody dies in peace. It depends on whether you see it happen or not, you know. Because as I shared in one of the last classes, you know, when people are brought back from being clinically dead, it's absolutely consistent that they say, wow, I didn't want to come back. I didn't want to come back. So this is the thing that you see, you can hear these things, and these things are talked about in churches where the priest says, have faith, don't worry, have faith, everything's okay, right? But when you're practicing meditation, you can actually get to the experience of that. You don't have to have faith in it. You can experience the truth about yourself, and you can experience that what you are is not physical and doesn't exist in time. You can experience that, and when you experience that, it makes all the difference. So it's one of the reasons that you want to keep practicing, right?